Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm Connor Rebush. That's Phil McKenzie.
Oh.
Low to you too, Phil. And welcome to another week between, well, I was going to say Apex cards. I have to actually double check. This certainly feels like an Apex card. Is it?
Might as well.
Yes, it is. It is. Of course. Another 14-bout lineup at the UFC's rented warehouse, also known as the Apex.
We really needed to be able to fit in Daniel Marquez versus Aori Kilang and Melsik Bagdasarian and versus Haida Amil.
I believe that is Fernie Garcia versus Hyder Emil now.
Oh no! What?
Yeah, sorry, Phil. You're not up to date on the latest undercard swaps here.
I was looking forward to it so much. So glad that they'd made room for that fight. I was like, yes, please.
What about Zach
Take it
Pauga?
up to 14 fights. It needs to be.
You haven't even mentioned Zach Pauga versus Bogdan Guskov.
Bogdan, who isn't here for Bogdan Guskov?
You're slipping, Phil.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're not a Bogdan Guskov fan, I don't know what to say to you.
Yeah, I mean, as we realized last week, this card is not actually as bad as it looks the moment you look at it. You glance at it and you're like, this is trash. Oh my God. More middleweights. I mean, our last 3 episodes of this show, Phil, I think it was called The True Face of Middleweight. And then it was called The Middleweights, in the style of the Aristocrats. And then last week was Even More Middleweights. What the fuck am I supposed to call this episode? Which is Yet More Middleweights?
I mean, this is some monkey's paw type stuff, right? We've famously been people who've been more positive about the middleweight division than others.
Yeah.
And we've been like, oh yeah, we like middleweight. It's a weird illustrative division, and it's like, let's see how you enjoy middleweights every week for weeks on end.
There's 4 middleweight fights on the main card. Every middleweight on the card is on the main card. That's how much they're trying to push the post-Adesanya middleweight division. And let me tell you, folks, that does not bespeak quality, because a lot of these fights are really bad.
I mean, yeah, we kind of come to the conclusion that it has to be that middleweight is simply the division that they have with the largest people in, which is actually the only one which is still to any extent functioning.
Yeah, and is
the
also
only one where they can say we've got the best fighters in the world and they're actually fighting.
Yeah. There's no like log jam at the top of the division like there are in several others. There's a lot of opportunities for different guys to fight each other. It's an assorting phase, I suppose, which you think would be the case at light heavyweight too, considering it has been in championship flux since John Jones's departure. But there just aren't as many guys, and they can't get them to fight as often.
Also, in light heavyweight, they've simply passed the belt enough that it's no longer easy to remember who the champion is.
Yeah.
It hasn't been for some time.
You did ask me before, and I did name the right man. I named Alex Pereira when asked who is the light heavyweight champion, but it did take me 3 or 4 seconds to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a good sign for a division. It's not a great sign. Hey, still easier to remember than who the current boxing super international champion of the WBO is,
Does have that going for it, yes.
So anyway, it's Jack Hermansson, Joe Pyfer. I don't think we've even mentioned their names. Those are the middleweights in question, the chief middleweights in question. Coming hot on the heels of last week's middleweight main event. Thank God it was 5 rounds.
Oh yeah, it needed to be.
Which was Roman Dolidze versus Nasruddin Imavov. Another one, I mean, almost as good as Strickland Plessis. Mm-hmm. Weirdly, a lot of the Strickland, the fleas who jumped to Strickland's already cooling body after Colby Covington's demise, they didn't show up for that card. I was pretty sure they liked middleweight fights, but for some reason they didn't seem, there wasn't a lot of heat about that card on social media. I don't know. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, this one will get him. Surely this one will hook him back in. Jack Hermansson versus Joe Pyfer. As was the case last week, the co-main event is a far more interesting and far more relevant fight. Dan Ige versus Andre Fili. Clearly the best fight on the card. Clearly. Mm-hmm. As Dober Moicano was clearly the best fight last week. We will end up talking about all 4 of the fights just mentioned. And I suppose we should cut the shit and jump right into the main event. Jack Hermansson, Joe Pyfer. One of them may sort of be a contender after this. How do you feel about it, Phil?
I think it's a pretty difficult fight to call. From like a skills perspective. Because Joe Pyfer is the kind of planted, slow-footed opponent that we've seen Jack Hermansson like confuse and like outlast before. Mm-hmm. He is not a man who throws a lot of volume. He's not a man who's particularly adept at cutting off the cage. There's definitely a world in which you can see him getting Chris Curtis. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Joe Pyfer is also huge. He's huge and he's a very good grappler, which means that Jack Hermansson's like primary method of beating people, which is to out wrestle them mm-hmm. with a not particularly good takedown game, and then tie them up with a genuinely very good grappling game, mm-hmm. Is going to be much more challenging. Because the main question is basically, can he run the same kind of back foot striking game against someone that he may just physically bounce off of?
Yeah. We're sort of taking it as a given that I think it's relatively easy to call what kind of approach Jack Hermansson is going to take to a given opponent. Mm-hmm. He is, as Joe Rogan is to non-fighting intellectuals, the dumb guy's version of a smart guy, Jack Hermansson is to game planning. You got like genuine game planners out there, like real inquisitive strategists, like, Bilal Muhammad, for example.
Or Corey Sandhagen or Volkanovski or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, who will often take what at surface level might even appear like a counterintuitive approach, but will find mm-hmm. A nice consistent way of dealing with the challenges of a particular opponent. And then you have the strategists on the level of Amanda Nunes, totally switching stance to defeat the jab of Jessica or Juliana Pena. And Jack Hermansson is in that category, I think. A broad strokes game planner. And so we're taking it as a given that he's looking at Joe Pyfer, big, beefy power puncher, a lot of first-round finishes. Jack Hermansson is going to be stick and move man. Like that is, I think, pretty much certain. That's the approach he's going to take. This guy wants to do this thing. I'm going to do the opposite. It'll work to an extent. It has to. I mean, Hermansson's, he moves pretty well. I wouldn't say he has really great footwork, but he has a lot of it.
Yep.
And he's pretty speedy. He's a pretty dexterous kicker. He's going to try to land a lot of calf kicks, certainly, on Joe Pyfer as he stalks after him. Joe Pyfer is also, as you pointed out, a right-handed fighter, which means Hermansson's going to get to use his jab. which he comically abandoned whenever Roman Dolidze, an even broader stroke game planner, by a good measure, whenever Dolidze went southpaw, Hermansson was like, oh shit, I have to throw right hands now.
It did work because Roman Dolidze is a dreadful southpaw, but...
I don't know what you're talking about. A dreadful southpaw? Well, then he must be good in orthodox. Wait, we're not talking about last week's fight yet. It worked to an extent. The other thing we know about Jack Hermansson, though, is that physicality is frequently a deciding factor in his fights. That's the case for every fighter to some extent. Like, physicality is very important. It's arguably much more important than technique at a certain level. But for Jack Hermansson in particular, many of his losses feature a turning point at which Jack Hermansson sort of bounces off of his opponent, ties up with them, tries to wrestle them, or gets into an exchange with them, and just feels the actual difference between his own physicality, his speed, his power, his durability, and theirs. And I think it rattles him. I don't think it means that he's like destined to lose. We know Hermansson is tough. He's very scrappy. If he has to, he will brawl with his opponent, as he did with Marvin Vettori. That was a super gutsy performance from him. But it is often the turning point where things sort of go off the rails, and Hermansson's very vague idea of a game plan, it kind of loses its track.
Yeah, and that is, I think, why I'm one of the reasons why I think I'm probably going to pick Pyfer, which is okay. Firstly, is that I have to trust Hermansson to be able to basically either win on the feet for 5 rounds without getting hurt, or to find a way to take Pyfer down and out-grapple him, which I find troubling. I find it difficult to see either one of those things work. Who is that? While Pyfer doesn't throw the volume or have the foot speed that you would want to see if you were picking him to win.
Yeah.
I think he is actually quite a decent striker for who he is.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
He's got a very tight left hook. He's quite accurate with what he throws. He does kick himself, which means that whilst I expect he's probably going to get calf kicked a bunch, he does at least seem to be ready to contest that space.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts trying to jam people once they're up against the cage, as he did against Al Hassan.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it is just basically one of those physicality things. I mean, because Pyfer is not just he's not just athletic. He's just large. He's just really big. Yeah. And that's going to do so much of the heavy lifting.
He's only an inch taller than Hermansson.
Someone like Chris Curtis couldn't afford.
Yeah.
Because he's just going to be huge.
Yeah. He's a little more cannoneer than he is Chris Curtis. And that
exactly
obviously worked out for Jared when he fought Hermansson. Yeah,
as far as the spectrum of really powerful, large athletic freaks that Hermansson has fought and lost to, I would class Pyfer as being less skilled than Cannoneer on the feet, but much a deal more skilled than Dolidze everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And if less skilled than Cannoneer, arguably a little more consistent in his approach.
Mm-hmm.
Pyfer, it's sort of to his benefit in that way that he's a pretty simple fighter. He's got a left hook and a right hand and a jab. That's mostly what he does.
Yep.
I would say a lot of Pyfer's success too comes down to the fact that he understands his distance really well.
Yeah.
Like it's actually difficult to just get free shots off on him. In order to do...
I mean, that Al Hassan fight was, mostly contested on the feet. And Al Hassan, if nothing else, is someone who's, like, dangerous and reasonably accurate with his wild strikes, but he just couldn't really get to him.
Exactly, yeah. Pyfer was himself the technician. That was, he chose to be a pretty patient, distance-controlling, pot-shotting fighter in that matchup, and he did it pretty well. I mean, he stuck to his guns pretty well. He was also the guy who was willing to wrestle. Which, Al Hassan himself is, I think he's got a judo background. He will tie up with people, but Pyfer showed some really powerful, pretty well-timed takedowns as a mix-up to his boxing. What I was going to say before, by the way, is he's only on paper an inch taller than Hermansson. But so was Roman Dolidze. And Roman Dolidze was visibly just a bigger man than Hermansson when the two fought. There's a moment pretty early in that fight where Hermansson does hit a takedown. I think it's like a counter double leg. Very well timed. Dolidze, despite pretty much only ever winning a fight after like something bizarre happens on the ground, and this was really emphasized last weekend, has no wrestling game. So the double leg just works. He just, he practically pulls guard. But then he sweeps Hermansson with like he goes for an arm bar and does it's not like a flower sweep, but sort of like one of those, the leg being across the body and then just extending the hips, rolls Hermansson over, can't control the position if he even wants to. And Hermansson gets back to like a body lock as Dolidze clambers back to his feet. And you can just see on Hermansson's face and through his whole body the strained determination to keep a hold of this man who is only an inch taller but about 5 inches wider than him at the waist. And, like, that's the moment in that fight, I think, where Hermansson suddenly, he can no longer be the smarter fighter because he has felt the physicality. He can't, in that wrestling sequence, he can't afford to try to think a step or two beyond Dolidze's defenses and reactions because all of his energy, mental and physical, has to be devoted to just trying to hold on to this guy who's just straight up stronger than him. And I think Pyfer does have that kind of physicality. He's probably also a better wrestler than Dolidze. Like he's almost certainly a better wrestler.
I don't think there's much probably there.
He might not have the bizarre winning chances on the ground that Dolidze has, but he's definitely a better wrestler. So I think I am also going to take Joe Pyfer.
I think it's definitely one where there is a definite possibility that, like, I think really the key to it is Hermansson's low kicking game.
100%.
Again, he should be able to get that rolling to at least some extent because Pyfer is orthodox. Pyfer's very planted. He's very, very much getting into the range to use that jab, left hook, and right hand kind of thing. He's got a lot of weight on that foot. When Al Hassan went for it, that was where a lot of his actual success came from.
Yeah.
Was like calf kicks and low kicks. That's definitely what Hermansson has to do. But I've also seen like Pyfer use low kicks in with his striking, and if he just starts pushing Hermansson back towards the cage consistently, eventually it's just going to be physicality versus physicality, and who do I trust to win that out more?
Yep.
I think we're probably heading for a decision again, just because Hermansson is like extremely mentally tough, and because the world just really wants us to watch as much middleweight as possible at the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to be optimistic and say that I think Pyfer, if Pyfer wins, I think he's got to stop Hermansson. I still don't really know how well Pyfer holds up past round 2.
Yep.
That's like a major concern. So my gut feeling is that if it goes beyond that point, Hermansson could just win it with sheer scrappiness. Certainly seems possible. I agree. It really, and whether that is possible for Hermansson really hinges on how much attrition he can rack up in the early going with the low kicks. And it's just not going to be comfortable for him because that was a lot of Al Hassan's success. It also wasn't actually dead simple for him to make it happen. Like, because Pyfer is actually trying to stay at the correct distance, a lot of the early low kicks he effectively evades. It's going to be the kind of thing where Hermansson is required to plant his feet and or step in to consistently get his kicks off. And I have a feeling that's maybe not going to... It depends on how well Pyfer can cut him off. Because if Pyfer has any kind of pressure game at all, then Hermansson's need to rack up damage with the kicks does not seem to gel with the game plan we're assuming he's going to take otherwise, which is to move around and stay away from Pyfer as much as possible.
Yep.
So, yeah, it just seems like Hermansson is going to walk himself onto a very narrow path to victory. And meanwhile, Pyfer just has to, not get his legs chewed up too much, not get tied up on the ground, and just stay on Hermansson. So, I'll take Pyfer by TKO. Tends to happen when Jack faces a really hard-hitting opponent.
Yep. It is unfortunately true, but yeah, I just feel like the world just wants us to see 5 rounds. So, take an increasingly grueling 5-round decision win from Joe Pyfer.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the main event. I don't know why we didn't start with it, actually. Really crazy. Dan Ige versus Andre Fili after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Time to get into the should-be middleweight. Or should-be middleweight. God, middleweight on the brain, Phil. I'm just going to start replacing different words.
Man, I wish these guys were bigger and worse, said Conor Rebush.
Yeah, tonight when my girlfriend is falling asleep, I'll accidentally say, "I love you too, middleweight." I mean, it's an infection. No, the should-be main event was the M word I was looking for. Featherweight bout between Dan Ige and Andre Fili. So clearly the best fight on the card. But also so clearly 40 pounds lighter than the guys in the main event. There's no avoiding that. That's just the truth. So.
Yep.
Sucks to be them.
Gotta have the big guys.
Sucks to be you, good fighters. This one, the main event was like, oh, this is quite difficult to pick. And then this is like a good version of quite difficult to pick, where it really feels like this is a matchup that could go either way. I was just saying that Andre Fili is really firmly established in a gatekeeper role in this division. He has been in that position for at least 5 years now, if not longer. And what that means is that, when Andre Fili fights a guy, he wins. When he fights Lucas Almeida, Bill Algeo, just on the wrong side of being in guy territory. When he fights Shaman Moraes, Miles Jury, he beats these guys. And then when he fights actual top level athletes, or top-level technicians, or both, he tends to lose. That's what happens with gatekeepers. And Dan Ige, as an opponent, is right on the line. Where, like, he himself was sort of in a gatekeeper role and getting fed to, like, clearly established elite fighters for a while. He had a bit of a breakthrough because he got a couple guys back to back. But you kind of, now you've seen him fight some other dudes in that sort of middling level, and you just don't see in Dan Ige the physicality you would expect to make him an easy pick against Feely. Neither do you see the consistency or depth of skill of, say, a Nathaniel Wood that would have you take him as like a lock against Feely. He's right on the line.
I mean, again, I wouldn't take Nathaniel Wood as a lock against Feely.
Fair enough, but you know what I mean. Like Nathaniel Wood, I think we picked him to beat Feely more confidently than we're going to pick either guy here.
Yeah, I think so.
You can really trust Nathaniel Wood to have a pretty consistent fight. Ige, meanwhile, I mean, that fight with Bryce Mitchell, did I think he won? Sort of, yeah. Did I think he won in the best way? Did I think it was a massive surprise that he didn't get the nod? Absolutely not. And that fight, along with a few others, really kind of emphasized some of Ige's limitations as both a technician and an athlete. So well, all of this is to say, it feels quite realistic that Andre Feely could beat Ige, even though Ige is the guy who has recently gained more profile, I think, than him.
Yeah. And, I think generally Ige has reached slightly higher heights. They've lost to sort of very similar levels of opposition.
Yeah.
But Ige has some better scalps on his resume, and obviously he did much better against like common opponents like Mitchell than Feely.
Yeah, that is.
But yeah, I mean, it is a tricky one because Feely. I mean, Ige is also one of those opponents where you can see lots of parts of Feely's game working against him.
Yeah,
like Feely's ability to just draw out responses and counters with his jab.
Yep.
But Feely can be very good at this. He jabs people to pull out the counter and then comes back at them. And, people who have been solely reactive against him have been kind of toasted by this. Like, what's his face? Like Miles Jury back in the day was just like, he was like, I'm going to counterpunch Andre Feely, and it was absolutely disastrous.
Shaman Moraes is the one I really think of. He got re-countered to death very quickly in that fight. I think Feely drew out a right hand with his jab, faded back, and then hit him with an uppercut.
And this is obviously one of the things which characterizes Ige as a fighter, is that he is someone who has only one speed and one power that he throws, and it is a lot.
And who is, at his best, a counterpuncher.
Yeah. And, and secondarily is the fact that Feely is a good wrestler, and that Ige, whilst he is himself like a pretty good takedown defender and good, like, offensive grappler himself, is also, like someone like Drew Dober is someone who has simply given up long stretches of fights to Top Control.
Yep.
So yeah, you can definitely see all of this kind of working quite well for Andre Feely.
And I think Feely also, like, the simplest point, surely he's much bigger than Dan Ige.
Yes.
Dan Ige is 5'7", with a 71-inch wingspan. Andre Feely, 5'11", 74-inch wingspan. So he is going to feel much, much longer in the cage than Dan Ige.
Yeah. The issues with... So, like, that's my case for Feely. But my issues with him are... he's just not as consistent as you would like him to be.
Yeah.
He doesn't win the fights that he should win as easily as he should.
Right.
And that he sometimes loses fights that, really badly that you think he should do much better in, like the Bryce Mitchell fight, for example.
Yeah.
Which, on paper, again, looks like a pretty good matchup for him.
Well, he didn't do that badly. I mean, it was a very clear loss, but he was competitive,
Yeah.
It's always a scrap with Feely.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he's winning or losing. He is one of those fighters who always comes to the level of his opponent.
Yeah. Yeah, at other points he's had his fight with what's his face? Conor McGregor's was his little guy that he hung around with. And he now hates
Artem Lobov.
Artem Lobov.
I like you describing him as Conor McGregor's little guy.
Yeah, you know who I
Wait,
am.
he hates him now? Why? What happened?
Oh, they had some kind of falling out over money or something. And,
oh, okay. Classic.
Yeah. McGregor doesn't strike me as someone who would keep many friends. Yeah, that was a matchup which seemed like Feely should be able to absolutely run him out of the cage.
Yeah.
And he just kind of couldn't.
Yep.
And Lobov's ability to keep coming back with counters just meant that Feely could never quite get comfortable knowing what he was, partially because Lobov just didn't respond to a lot of his feints and abilities and attempts to draw him out.
Yeah.
So that Feely just didn't know when he was sitting down on something. I don't know that Dan Ige is going to do that, but what he is going to do is that he will respond when he counters with tremendous firepower and accuracy, and that he will, he just has big chances to turn, single counters into round-winning moments.
Yep. As, Nathaniel Wood did. Needed some big moments to beat Feely. Charles Jourdain almost had the big moments he needed to beat Andre Feely.
Yep.
And then, of course, Joe Anderson Brito just straight up flatlined Feely in the first minute of their fight.
Yeah.
So there's usually Feely is quite durable. Usually, unless it's it is a really powerful hitter, like Yair Rodriguez or Joe Anderson Brito. He will take the shots.
Yep.
And fight back really hard, but yeah, again, there's just a sort of physicality barrier that Ige may ride the line, but he's clearly not on the wrong side of it. It's not impossible to imagine. He certainly has the power to net at least one of those big moments that often lose Feely
also
fights.
the sheer durability to be able to ride out almost certainly whatever Andre Feely throws at him.
No question. And that will be a big help to answer Feely's scrappiness. Yeah, I think
Go on,
yeah.
I was just going to say, you know what? I think I am leaning towards Feely, even though I think it is probably a bad pick.
Okay, let's hear it.
I mean, I think it is just simply the combination of factors. I think it's the fact that Ige has a hair trigger for counters, which I think will actually work quite well for Feely. I think Feely will be able to hit counter takedowns on him. I don't know how decisive they will be in winning rounds, but it is only a 3-rounder.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be more. Yeah, I mean, I just think that it is a good style matchup for Andre Feely.
Yeah.
And Ige is not Nathaniel Wood in one key way, because if you're thinking explosive, stocky, it's his clinch game. It's just not there in the same way. But he's powerful.
Yep.
But he certainly doesn't have the kind of inside game that Wood was able to use whenever he locked up with with Feely, because what Ige is normally looking to do is he is either looking to wrestle, or he is offensively, or he is looking to disengage.
Yep.
He does not have much of a sort of MMA Lab-esque interstitial game.
Nor does he have a particularly good outside game. I think this is one of the problems with Ige, is that one of the things that I think Nathaniel Wood's a good comparison. As you said before, like, Wood is not so far beyond Feely that the fight wouldn't be competitive, and it was. It was quite competitive. But the reason that Wood feels just like a much safer pick is that his game is just a lot more flexible. You could strap, 4 or 5 basic broad game plans onto Nathaniel Wood, and he could probably do them all with reasonable consistency. He's effective at every range. He's effective in every phase. In fact, sometimes he loses fights because he has to be effective in every phase to win. It sometimes like handcuffs him. Ige is just way more limited. When it is required of Ige to take the front foot and fight from range and actually crash through into the middle distance where his punches are most effective, you see things like we saw in his fight with Bryce Mitchell, where it was like, Ige, buddy, just hit the body. Even once, I'm begging you. Use your jab. Just once, I'm begging you. And he just kept slinging overhand lefts. Like he didn't have a nuanced idea of how to actually methodically close the distance on a guy, even though he clearly had the punching power and boxing skill advantage over him. It was still awkward for him to actually get to his spots. He doesn't have a lot of the connective pieces. He's got the great counter boxing game in the pocket. And that is built on some jabs and some feints, but none of those are consistent enough for him to really kind of sit in that open space, setting up his own openings. And then he doesn't have, neither is he as effective as Nathaniel Wood with his wrestling. And there is one area where it takes genuinely a very high level of both athlete and technician to have success against Andre Feely, because Feely is a standout wrestler. He's very difficult to take down, extremely difficult to control if taken down, and is himself a really surprising and effective takedown artist when he needs to be. For a tall guy, Feely's got a great shot.
Yep.
This almost certainly means we're wrong, but like I can't help myself kind of feeling like this is a good fight for Feely too.
Yeah. As I said, I think it is I think it's probably a bad pick.
Yeah.
Because Ige is an overperformer.
Yeah.
I suspect if you looked at the odds of these two guys over their careers, I almost certainly think that you would find Ige doing better than his odds in many fights.
Yeah.
Or at least more than Andre Feely has. He is someone who is able to win rounds off big moments, which he's done against, people like Edson Barboza and so on.
Right.
That I'm not so sure that Andre Feely would be able to beat. He's just one of these guys has been finished a bunch of times, admittedly by big punchers, but Ige is a big puncher. But one of these guys is also just, one of the most durable fighters we've ever seen. Yeah.
The trouble with picking Feely is that intellectually you're picking a guy who looks like Feely, right? When you're picturing how he wins this fight, you're like, oh, he can do all these things well. He's much bigger. That looks like a pretty good matchup. But you have to remind yourself, if you're actually trying to be smart about it, that he's not just a guy who looks like Andre Feely. He's Andre Feely.
Yep.
And that means there's a huge window of variance for how consistently he might apply any of these seeming advantages to his opponent.
Yeah.
Like, for example, here's one thing. I feel like this is yet another one of those fights there have been quite a few, where Fili's size and well-roundedness means that he should really lean on his kicking game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that seems like such an obvious thing against planted little boxing range only Dan Ige. And I'm thinking of, for example, his fight with Daniel Pineda, which unfortunately ended due to an eye poke, but which Andre Fili was dominating largely with his kicks. He kicked the shit out of Daniel Pineda's body in that fight. He chopped at his legs. We know Andre Fili has a really pretty high kick in his arsenal, which he throws at least once every fight, and sometimes lands it really well. He's a great kicker, really, and a powerful kicker. But then there are fights like his bout in 2018 with Michael Johnson. Another one where the opponent was much smaller, and Fili did have an advantage with his kicks, but there was just something off about, like, he just couldn't find a way of consistently setting them up. Neither would he just throw them so incessantly that they were a problem whether Johnson allowed them to be or not. He threw quite a few, as I recall, but he hunted the head kick a little too much. He didn't really... Fili just... I think he just kind of gets one-tracked a lot of the times, which is why I think he fights to the level of his opposition. Like, he just gets sort of zeroed in on, like, one or two ideas. And it's kind of easy for a clever opponent to lead him around by the nose a little bit, to draw him into a certain kind of exchange over and over.
Yep.
He's too tactical and not strategic enough. He can't keep in mind, winning the rounds and controlling the direction and the momentum of a fight, as well as the best guys in the division can. And so, like, that's the trouble. You're picking a guy who looks like Fili, who would go into this matchup and be like, I'm going to kick the hell out of Dan Ige. I'm going to rip his rib cage apart, with both legs, and I am going to periodically test the effect of those body kicks by just slinging a really quick shot at his head, which is quite close to my hips because I'm significantly taller than him. And then you're going to get an actual Andre Fili in the cage who does that about 50% as much as you want him to.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise just kind of drifts around trying different things. Yeah. So I'm going to pick Andre Fili with you, but I think we both recognize that
it's a stupid pick.
It is a stupid pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was like the fight with Sadiq Yusuff, where I mentioned the his ability to like jab people and draw out their counters. That all that happens in that fight is that Yusuff walks up to him, and he's like, "I'm going to jab at the same time as you." And that's pretty much it.
Yep.
Like, Fili cannot stop himself from trying to jab with Yusuff, and his only answer to being, basically, because Yusuff is just hitting harder and is getting to the target before him, his only answer is essentially then to just start brawling with him.
Yeah.
And he just, slowly sort of gets pushed out of the fight. And that's just something that tends to happen to him. Like Hermansson, he is definitely someone who has whose main advantage in fights is that he is just, like, big and well-conditioned, but is obviously not particularly athletic.
Yeah.
And there is historically there are moments in his fights where you can also see that it's just not happening for him. Like, on a physical level. That Yusuff fight definitely being one of them. And, Ige is the better athlete. He is faster, stronger, more durable, all these other things. I'll pick Fili. It's
just fun. We're having fun here, folks.
I think this is the one where it's like enough, even though this would be like the best opponent he's fought, the best person he's ever beaten.
Yep.
I think it's just one where there's just enough things slotting together for him to be able to actually do it.
Yeah. I mean, the trouble is you've watched Andre Fili for years and years and years. None of the guys, with the few exceptions of the ones who just, like, slept him, and those are few and far between, nobody does have an easy fight with Andre Fili.
Mm-hmm.
So he is one particularly consistent performance away from beating somebody at that level. It is distinctly possible, while also just really never happening. So basically we're hoping, let this be the night where it just clicks for Andre Fili. And it really could happen.
It could.
But it probably won't.
And it won't.
Still, I'll be rooting for him. I love Andre Fili. I have been a big fan for a long time. I wouldn't be the guy I am who roots for these kind of like one magic night performances if it truly never happened. It does happen.
Mm-hmm.
It does happen where really seasoned fighters come in and they just have the fight of their life basically, against a good opponent, and all that experience finally like pays off and culminates in a really impressive performance. I don't think Fili has like lost a serious step in any way. I think he continues to get a little more subtle and a little craftier with his boxing game, which has just been gradually improving for the last half decade at least. I think he's still a very good fighter. He just loses track of what he needs to be doing to actually picking up the rounds. And Dean Ige himself, I think, is inconsistent a performer enough that this very well could be that magic night for Andre Fili to get a serious scalp in his collection.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, even if he loses, there's always the Alex Caceres fight for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if he loses, it's going to be a good fight, which is why it should be the main event. It's really interesting and guaranteed to be more exciting than many other fights on this card.
So yeah, in the tape for this one, as we were saying, I was watching what was it? Ewell versus Ige, and trying to find it because the fight itself was not working on Fight Pass, so you have to find the actual like full event. And what was it? The co-main event to? It was the co-main event.
Volkov Rosenstrike.
Volkov Rosenstrike. Of which the best you can say about it was that it was mercifully brief.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yep. Yeah, the best thing you can say about a UFC Fight Night main event is also the best thing you can say about a sexual encounter with me. Thank God it was over quickly, you know? Nobody was hurt. Well, Jairzinho Rosenstrike was hurt.
Anything potentially incriminating here, Connor.
No. My sticking point was that Rosenstrike was hurt. Nobody in my sexual encounters has been hurt other than me. I've pulled a few muscles. Let's call this there. When we come back, Roman Dolidze versus Nasruddin Imavov after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Middleweights everywhere. Last week's main event featured two of the middleweightiest of them all, Nasruddin Imavov and Roman Dolidze. Now, first thing, I have a few things to say about this fight. This was so interesting in the way that only a middleweight main event could be. By which I mean it was really very bad. It was really a miserable experience that I nonetheless was fascinated by. First thing, it was, by and large, very much the fight I was anticipating. what I failed to consider, and this is a truly massive oversight, both for me and for the fighter in question, is that Roman Dolidze does not know how to wrestle.
No.
I was aware of all the other things he doesn't know how to do, which is why I wasn't surprised by how comical the striking was in this fight. But I overlooked really the extent to which he can't wrestle. I was correct. Let me put it this way. I was correct to be worried about Nasruddin Imavov versus Phil Halls. Mm-hmm. My error was then looking at Dolidze's fight with Phil Halls, when what I should have looked at was Dolidze versus Laureano Staropoli.
I mean, everyone should be looking at that fight all the time.
Yeah. Go back and watch. If you haven't seen that one, you really owe it to yourself to go back and watch it, particularly if you've committed some crime. Then you really owe it to yourself. It's what you deserve. Yeah, that's a fight where Dolidze gets the clinch he's obviously wants many, many times. And despite the fact that his opponent has no idea how to break those positions, as Imavov didn't last weekend, Dolidze also had no idea how to progress from those positions. And so what happened is this was 50% a fight, or maybe 35% a fight, where Imavov was kicking the absolute shit out of Dolidze, and then 65% a fight in which Dolidze was holding him against the cage, doing nothing except apparently, like a video game character, sleeping in order to regain health for the next segment of Imavov beating the shit out of him. So that was the fight. It was a tale of two fights. One of them was unfortunately in the majority and was terrible, terrible, terrible to watch.
This was gratifying from my perspective simply because
yeah.
It was a middleweight, a split picks, and I was right because I'm so good at picking fights.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But also, it was gratifying to look at someone and just be like, no, this guy sucks. This guy sucks. I'm not picking it.
This was the universe paying you back for refusing to believe that Dricus could win a middleweight championship.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Dricus has been continuing to, he's the champion now, so...
defying all logic.
Yeah. But, this was man, it's like Dricus, but without any of this strategy, and, that's the only thing that makes Dricus work.
Yeah.
This was, by and large, a dreadful fight. The main dynamic was simply that Dolidze had decided that he would try and counter the right hand by slipping inside and then not going for a takedown, but simply going for a clinch.
Mm.
And then he would walk Imavov all the way back to the fence with very little resistance. They would just sit there for a really long time.
Yep.
But whenever Imavov did anything that wasn't throwing a right hand, to be fair, he threw the right hand because...
it crushed Dolidze whenever it landed, and it did land a lot.
Yeah. Yes. But it was it ended up being a bit of a gamble where it was either going to be a huge, impactful, virtually fight-deciding shot, or it was just going to inevitably lead to 3 minutes of absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, his team was eventually was just just stop throwing the right hand. And then that led to one of the more baffling parts of this fight. Because when Imavov was just sitting at range, just jabbing and snap kicking Dolidze.
Yeah.
Dolidze had absolutely no idea what to do. The only thing he had in mind to counter, and this was only with empty clinch offense, was the right hand. And they kept talking in the booth about how much he'd been training with Sean Strickland. I was like, what were you doing?
Losing, apparently.
If you were sparring all this time with Sean Strickland, and you have absolutely zero answer to either a jab or a snap kick, the only strikes that Sean Strickland ever throws.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
I just don't know what their sparring looked like.
It's hard to picture.
Because all this fight came down to was the moments where Imavov tried to break up the rhythm or got bored and tried to finish it or whatever and threw a right hand and then got walked into the cage. Sean Strickland would never do that. It would simply be minutes on end of him jabbing Dolidze up.
Yep.
It was just absolutely baffling to me.
Yep.
But yeah, and there was also, a Dolidze moment in there where they got tangled up. There was no wrestling to speak of, but there was some tanglage, and then it looked like he might be able to do something.
I believe he pulled guard. His most successful moment of the fight, he pulled guard into like a sacrifice butterfly sweep.
Yep. The Gracies watching that one approvingly.
Oh, they were
pointing and tapping Kron on the shoulder and being like, "Look, see, that guy knows what he's doing."
Yeah, Hickson was rock hard watching that. That was so very tittillating for that crew.
They should adopt him and just disown Kron.
Man, picture Dolidze armed with the Gracie stomp. That's a force to be reckoned with. One thing I want to say is that I think there is some promise in this performance from Nasruddin Imavov. And in particular, I want to highlight something we failed to mention last week, which is that Imavov is not, and has not been, I think, for 2 fights now, a Fernand Lopez fighter. Which can only be a good thing for him. Because while Lopez certainly has an ability to attract a lot of talented fighters from Europe and the Mediterranean sort of region, he has demonstrated now with Francis Ngannou previously and with Cyril Gane that maybe he doesn't take these naturally gifted fighters to their full potential technically. That it's a very awkward and rocky process. They sort of get equipped with a one-size-fits-all approach, and that either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And you could see the struggle in this fight of Imavov being forced by a new team, who, I gotta say, their advice was really simple and arguably very obvious, but also very good. Every time he went back to the corner, because their advice was mostly, do jabs. Jab him. For fuck's sake, Imavov, jab. They were yelling it from the corner. It's all they wanted, was the jab. And as you said, for good reason. Because when he was jabbing, Dolidze had no idea what to do. And all the ideas he did have were bad and didn't work. His idea... I was going to say, correct that to ideas, but no. His idea... clinch up, it only worked when Imavov got away from the jab. But it was a struggle because that is not the guy Imavov was already formed into. That is not the guy he was under Lopez. He was not jab man. He was laser right hand in middle distance man. And if there was a jab, it was because it was the first half of a 1-2. And he just kept, despite how effective the jab was, he kept drifting away from it. For that reason, I think this was a great example of the kind of friction that happens when a fighter changes teams or changes preparation in some way, and it just doesn't all click at once. It almost never clicks all at once. I think this was a great snapshot of like a developing stage in Imavov's career, and it was very funny, as well as being interesting because, the jab was super effective, but then there were long portions of this fight where Imavov would just go back to what he does. I mean, granted, he was tired too. He emptied the tank, nearly killing Dolidze at the end of round 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, that is also something I'm generally very forgiving of.
Yeah, no, I completely understand him going ape shit looking for the finish there. Like, 50% of referees would have stopped the fight there. And no one would have been upset about it, except, Dolidze. So yeah, I'm not going to fault him for that, and I think he held it together relatively well for having spent so much early, especially as a guy that I picked against him on the understanding that he would probably gas. He held it together. But there were a lot of moments where there was just straight up empty space, where Dolidze has no idea how to close the distance except for just barreling forward. And Imavov is not naturally a guy who fills like negative space with jabs and feints. So there were so many hilariously long portions of this fight where these two just stood opposite each other about 4 feet apart, doing nothing.
Yep.
They just looking at each other like, no, you go. No, you.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the moments where you could hear Imavov's corner just like, Nasruddin, please jab him. I beg you. Use your jab. He's just standing there. And,
yeah, I mean, did he almost manage to lose this fight?
No way. I mean,
this is the thing. I did not give Dolidze a round.
No, me neither.
But I think some people did. I mean, weirdly enough, there was like, is there some way in which like people are saying that Dolidze did enough in round 2, which was incredibly empty to win it. I don't think he did.
No.
But also that like maybe in the round with the foul, he could have potentially won that as well. And that gives you like a draw, I think.
Well, that would be criminal. Let's go ahead and compare. Let's compare what we have on MMA decisions to what we have on UFC stats.
Mm-hmm.
MMA decisions, vast majority of people, media people, scored it 49-44 Imavov. So they did give Dolidze a round. There's one 49-46, and then there's a lot of 48-45s. That's right. Oh, no, they didn't give him a round. There was a point deduction.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. So the majority of people gave Imavov all 5 rounds, with one of them being a 10-8.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair.
Which is, I think, the correct score.
Yep, I would agree. The official judges...
Yes, McCarthy gave it a 47-47.
That's the one. Ron McCarthy.
Yeah, at least partially, because I don't know if any of the actual judges gave round 1 a 10-8. Which is insane.
One judge did. Derek Cleary scored it 10-8.
Derek Cleary did. Oh, yes, Imavov. There we go.
And he scored round 4 9-9. Derek Cleary had the correct scorecard, is what we're realizing.
Yeah. There we go.
Ron McCarthy thought Dolidze won round 4 and round 2.
Yeah.
Anyway, here are the stats. Significant strikes, it's 112-34. Dolidze 0 for 4 on takedown attempts, netting 10 minutes 11 seconds of control time with no takedowns.
Control time in extremely large inverted commas.
Yes, with no strikes accompanying that control time, no activity of any kind, basically just both fighters looking very sleepy and holding each other against the cage. Romantic, maybe. Fight winning, I beg to differ.
No kidding.
So, yeah, nobody should score a single round of that fight for Dolidze. He got pantsed. The only success he had depended entirely on Imavov's own sort of inconsistency and continuing process of improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And even that, none of it was enough to pick him up a round, in my opinion. Not even close.
I agree.
All right. Well, those were the middleweights. What about the rest of the card? Drew Dober, Renato Moicano was good. It wasn't good all throughout. Yeah. It seemed to sort of You kind of felt like the story of the fight had revealed itself at one point, but then it got crazy again, and overall, just a much, much, much better fight than the main event. And go figure.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just the dynamic between these two just played out in every single round. It's just like, Moicano can hang on the feet with Dober, but it's a very dicey proposition for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Drew Dober is capable of surviving on the ground, but it's definitely still something where he's going to lose to concerted grapplers who take him there. Yeah, it wasn't that just like... Because, yeah, after the first round, it was very up in the air as to whether, like... You know, you were just like, oh, is this going to be a Drew Dober fight where he's just... Moicano can, you know, once he gets into the floor, the round is literally over. But no, to his credit, he fought back. I think partially because of, it was one of those very MMA things, partially because of that amazing, like, lateral drop he hit when...
Yeah, that was awesome. And then
when Moicano was trying to take him down, which he then, flopped.
Went back to the
third
well.
Round, which then promptly lost him that one.
And he went back to the well in the most disappointing way, because the first one was a really great, like, situational trick. Moicano was going for the same takedown that had worked twice before. Shooting in on the legs on like a single and then running around to the rear waist cinch and trying to kind of back trip Drew Dober. And that required, you know, both times it worked, Dober picked up on the fact that it required Moicano to really drive into him hard with the shot, really commit to one direction of movement. And that's a great opportunity to hit something like a lat drop, a great counter takedown, a reversal kind of move. And then the second time, because it worked, Dober went for it when it was not called for. He just went for it again because it worked previously, which I can understand. But it wasn't even like the setup to the first one was so like intuitive and well timed. The second one, he tried to force it, and it just turned into a flop.
Yep.
So, yeah, not really a move you typically see work twice in one fight, a lat drop.
No. Sometimes you see it work, like, negative once in one fight if it's Dricus.
Yeah. He didn't flop as badly as Dricus. He can wear that with pride. But, yeah, I mean, I was almost dead wrong about one particular point I made about this fight, which is that Drew Dober's not much of a comeback fighter.
Mm-hmm.
He really was. I got to give the man massive credit for the comeback he tried to stage. Yes, it ended with one tragically hilarious error, but he was really kind of figuring it out. I mean, he first countered the takedown. Around that, he was stuffing Moicano's shots. He found a way in round 3 to really up the pressure. I do think part of the slip with the second lat drop attempt was connected to Dober's usual inability to come back, which is that he was getting tired.
Yeah.
Pretty clearly. He just doesn't have the gas tank to fight as well, as consistently in round 3 as he does early. But, all round, quite an entertaining fight with some big momentum swings, and should have been the main event. Duh.
Mm-hmm.
The highlight, of course, Phil, did you catch Moicano's post-fight speech?
No, I didn't.
Can I read it to you?
Please.
It's long. I'll warn you. It's long, but boy, it has even more twists and turns than the fights itself. He was asked some question by Daniel Cormier. What he said was not an answer to the question. He immediately grabbed the mic and screamed, I'm not going to scream it, "My father is 62 years old and he had a baby yesterday. I'm telling him tomorrow when I get home, I'm going to get my wife pregnant another time. Because if my fucking father, 62 years old, can populate the world, I can too. Money Moicano III is coming." He went on to say, almost immediately after this, there were very few breaths taken, "I love fucking America. I'm not American, but I will be. My green card is 3 years. In 2 years, I will be a fucking American. After I'm done with fighting, I will serve as a police officer. I want to be on the SWAT team, and I want to fucking kill the bad guys. Make no mistake, there is right and there is fucking wrong, and people are forgetting about that. People are going crazy. So that's why I want more kids. I want people to go to church. I want people to respect the fucking law, because otherwise the greatest country in the world is going to be a third world country. I don't want that, motherfucker. Something is wrong in America, and I want motherfucker to fix it right now. He said all of that much more quickly than I just did. I mean, it was real stream. Oh, and they didn't even mention in this article I'm quoting from that immediately after that, he told people to subscribe to his YouTube channel.
To which they were presumably like, sure, yes, I will do that.
Is this the kind of stuff you're putting up there? Because I'm a UFC fan, and this is right up my alley. I also want to kill bad guys. Yeah, I quoted, sort of paraphrased that on Twitter, and got a real interesting range of replies to the tweet.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Based department? That was about half of them. Yeah. Hello, based department? Killing bad guys is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other half had my reaction, which was to think, not sure I realized that Hermansson Moicano is like actually an insane person.
Yes.
This man is unstable.
These are the words of a madman.
Yeah, he is unstable and a danger to everyone around him. He has an earnest desire to commit murder, and that is alarming. So yeah, that was Hermansson Moicano's moment in the sun. And that was the card. Did anything else happen?
What's that?
Did anything else happen?
I mean, we all had the same reaction to Randy Brown, Muslim Salikov, right?
Oh, yeah, that was pretty.
But I mean, all of us presume, like, everyone must have had the same reaction as me in the run-up to the fight, which was starting to think, why did I pick Randy Brown? He's Randy Brown. And then seeing Muslim Salikov throw like 2 low kicks and then just thinking, oh no, it's over.
Yeah, yep.
No, well done, Randy Brown. And you know what? It wasn't a flying knee.
Nope.
It wasn't a jumping triangle. It wasn't a spinning back kick. It was a 1-1-2.
It was dead fucking simple. And it worked.
Wasn't that fun, Randy Brown? Did you not enjoy winning with a 1-1-2? Did you not feel like Randy Brown, would like to do this kind of thing more often?
I hope so. That was my exact feeling. I was like,
hope so.
I hope he takes this to heart. That he went in there.
Yeah.
And he used his jab. You know, he did set it up. I mean, he fired that jab and that double jab quite a bit. He was clocking Salikov's reactions. And then the final blow was really beautiful in a very minimalist way, as good technique often is. First jab just popped Salikov's head back. Not a huge punch, but it just popped him on the nose. Second jab, Salikov slipped, but Randy Brown anticipated him slipping it. He didn't throw that one with any steam. It was just a placeholder. It was there to fill the beat and to keep something in Salikov's face so that he could not react in time to the very nice straight right hand, the angle for which was achieved by the first jab he threw. I mean, a real cohesive, simple combination. The beginning set up the end. The middle was there. The second jab to connect the two pieces together and to keep a hold of the initiative. Beautiful, technical boxing combination. And very simple. We love it.
Yeah. Great to see.
Yeah.
More of that, please, Randy.
More.
And yeah, lastly, it was just Natalia Silva, Viviane Araujo, and I think the call where we were just like, she's really fast, was basically all there was to this one.
She's got to be one of the fastest fighters in the UFC relative to her competition.
Mm-hmm.
The gulf, because the point what we were talking about was that Araujo is like her first actual athletic test in the UFC, who is on her level physically, and I think in the aggregate that may still be true, but solely in the realm of speed, she was actually nowhere close to as quick as Silva. No competition. She made Araujo look every bit as clueless as she did Andrea Lee. And she did it while still giving me much reason for concern about like the true depth and confidence that she actually has in her boxing game. Like one thing that really stood out was, and Daniel Cormier, credit to him, he picked up on this very quickly too, that she was pulling her own punches. Really right up until the last round, I think, when she felt so in the driver's seat that she was countering and putting combinations together and actually staying in range for a minute. The whole first round and much of the second, Silva was pulling her own punches. She did not feel the comfort of like having the right angle to get the jab in. She was staying very square and sidestepping too much, not moving into Araujo enough, not like piercing her stance as you are supposed to with your jab against another orthodox fighter. And so there was this weird thing where like the angle for it was there, but she wasn't actually committing. She wasn't turning her body enough, and she kind of left herself in no man's land a lot. Awkward jab, sidestep, moving back, pulling your head back, completely squaring up. If Araujo was a better technician, or at least close to as fast as Silva, she would have had ample opportunities to punish her in those moments, but she just wasn't quick enough.
Or if she'd had any kind of like cage cutting weapons, even aside from footwork, if she'd just thrown more round kicks or low kicks or, wide shots.
Yeah.
But no, it was all on the sort of predicated on the understanding that at some point Silva was going to be standing in front of her, which was just never really true.
Just didn't happen. Yeah, I'm glad at least that I said beforehand that I did expect Silva to do a lot of running around Araujo and for that to just be pretty effective at neutralizing Vivi's game. It was.
Yeah. Oh, good performance. And yeah, looks like she's probably heading towards some kind of title eliminator, I would guess.
For sure. Yeah. As she should. I mean, there's no one else who has a better case for that kind of fight in this division right now. She's been really...
There's... who's the person who just fought Rose Namajunas? She's basically... Whoever wins her next fight is I think, fighting for the belt.
Well, that was... That was at... that was at women's flyweight. That's right.
Yeah.
What is
Manon Fiorot? Whoever she's fighting.
Couldn't remember her name. Yeah, I'd be happy to see Fiorot versus Silva. I mean, I think that would be quite possibly a very, very close fight. Quite a difficult one. Is Fiorot already scheduled?
Yes, I think she is booked into a title eliminator with Erin Blanchfield.
Okay.
At least it seems like it's a probable title eliminator.
Fair enough. I mean, hey, I'm pretty happy that we are in a position now, what feels like a slightly better position than, say, middleweight post Adesanya. Women's flyweight post Shevchenko, you would really imagine that to be just a wasteland where there's like no clearly good fighters, but Blanchfield, Fiorot, Silva. I'm not even ready to write Rose Namajunas off. Despite the fact that she had a rough go in her last fight, I still think she looked like she's capable of being a decent fighter in this division. So, women's flyweight looking better than it did for the last several years across the board.
Yeah. Yep. And bantamweight looking even worse.
Worse than ever before. Okay. Well, that surely will do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Of course, coming around the bend, we do have a good card. The UFC robbing Peter to pay Paul, as ever, completely shorting all of their Fight Night cards in order to put together big international pay-per-views that really get your mouth watering. Coming up around the bend, it is, of course, UFC 298. Alexander Volkanovski.
Anthony Hernandez versus Roman Kopylov.
Is that on there? It is. I like that fight.
Yeah, and it's their middleweight, so presumably it must be the main event.
Well, there's also Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa. So that must be the main event. Wait, it's not. Hold on, there's some mistake. They've made Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria the main event.
These tiny little men?
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to me. But there is that fight. Whittaker Costa, Jeff Neal versus Ian Gary, Merab Dvalishvili versus Henry Cejudo, Fluffy Hernandez versus Roman Kopylov, Amanda Lemos, Mackenzie Dern. There is a lot of good shit on this card. And we're going to have a fun time talking about it. We will almost certainly be cranking out a bonus episode with so many interesting fights to cover. So you have that to look forward to next week. And we're done with the middleweights for now, so you have that to look forward to as well. This has been the Heavy Hands. I said that too soon. I first have to say that you find us on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil at Boxing Bush. That's me. Check out our Patreon. We appreciate your support. We love you. We are your friends. We know each and every one of you personally, just as well as you know us. And we look forward to talking to you next week about UFC 298 and more. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, this is Heavy Hands.
Came to the right place.
Oh, yeah. Shit. Shit.